shattered stone. First time I met Dr. Samir Khan, I was leading a climbing expedition on the delicate arch route when the ground literally started shaking and he refused to evacuate the research station because seismic data showing the earthquake's epicenter was directly beneath the canyon we were standing in. I didn't know his name yet, didn't know anything except that I was Ethan Price, 27, guiding for intermediate climbers up Utah's most technically demanding route, and the earth was actively moving in ways that made my stomach drop, and my survival instinct screamed to get down. The quake hit at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in May, a 6.2 magnitude, not massive by California standards, but enough to make everything unstable. Rocks that had been solid for millions of years suddenly loose and ready to fall. The route I was on was literally built on 2,000-year-old Navajo sandstone that was now responding to seismic activity like it was made of sugar. Down, I shouted to my team, already moving toward the anchor point. Everyone down now. We rappelled and controlled speed 60 feet in 90 seconds, my hands burning on the rope, my heart hammering because I could feel rockfall somewhere above us, and the ground wasn't done shaking. We hit solid ground as the second tremor hit, weaker than the first but enough to confirm this wasn't over. The research station was maybe 100 yards away, a small cluster of instruments and a prefab building where USGS geophysicists monitored the needles fault line running through Canyonlands. I was herding my clients toward the evacuation zone when I saw someone emerge from the station, covered in dust, carrying what looked like a server tower. "Are you kidding me right now?" I called out, abandoning my group for a second to intercept him. "You need to evacuate." The guy, dark hair, glasses covered in dust, Middle Eastern features, panic in his eyes, looked at me like I'd suggested he voluntarily walk into a volcano. "The data servers," he said, breathless. "All of today's seismic readings are on this system. If I don't get them to redundant storage in the next 40 minutes, we lose real-time earthquake data that could help us understand what's happening in this fault system. What's happening is an earthquake is happening, and you're standing in a canyon that's actively trying to collapse." I'm aware. He was already moving toward a truck. "But if we don't preserve this data, we don't understand the fault progression. That data could save lives in the next major event." I should have let him go, should have managed my clients and left him to his academic stubbornness. Instead, I found myself following him. "I'm Ethan," I said, grabbing the server tower and loading it into the truck bed. "Rock climbing guide. Currently making terrible decisions. Samir Khan." He was already running back to the station. "Geophysicist. Also making terrible decisions." "How long?" 30 minutes to transfer the critical files. "Maybe less if we move fast." The ground shook again, a smaller tremor, but enough to make both of us stop dead. The building groaned. Something in the ceiling shifted. 20 minutes, I said. "That's what you've got. The station's not stable enough for longer." Samir moved like someone possessed. Into the station, straight to a bank of computer servers, hands flying across keyboards while his eyes stayed locked on progress bars and data transfer windows. Around us, the building was making sounds I'd never heard, concrete make creaking, groaning. "The kind of noise that says I'm about to come apart." 90%, Samir muttered. Come on, 15 minutes, Samir." 95%, the building shook. Not an aftershock, the grinding sound of shifting rock and failing concrete. A crack spider webbed across the ceiling. "Now." I grabbed him, the server drive he'd been holding, and ran. We made it out as the ceiling collapsed exactly where we'd been standing. Not dramatic, not slow motion, just a sudden violent shift of structure meeting gravity and losing. We scrambled away from the dust cloud, running until we were clear of falling debris, then collapsed against a rock formation. Samir was gasping, covered in concrete dust, clutching the external hard drive like it was a child. "You're crazy," I said. Between breaths, "You stayed in a collapsing building for a stranger's data." He replied, "Yeah, well, I'm also crazy." We sat there for a moment, both of us trying to get our hearts to slow down from actively dying to just very scared. The earthquake had stopped. The aftershocks seemed to be finishing. Emergency services would be here in minutes. But for a moment, it was just the two of us in the Utah desert, covered in dust, Alive. Samir looked at me properly for the first time, and I felt something shift in my chest that had nothing to do with seismic activity. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That was incredibly stupid and dangerous, and I'm grateful beyond words. You're welcome. Want to explain to my clients why their climbing guide is currently dating a geophysicist who thinks data is more valuable than his life. Is that what we're doing? Dating? I don't know. But I know I can't stop thinking about the fact that you would die for your research. And I just met you, and I'm extremely attracted to that kind of commitment." He laughed, actually laughed, despite nearly being buried alive. "I'm at the Emergency Response Center in Moab. If you're not completely horrified by my poor decision-making skills, maybe we could have coffee tomorrow, when we're both not covered in dust and adrenaline." "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." The coffee shop was called Arch's Roast, a small place with good espresso and a view of the canyon. Samir showed up in a button-up shirt that made his shoulders look impossible, hair combed out of his face, looking far less like someone who'd nearly died in an earthquake and more like someone who taught physics to brilliant people. "You look less panicked," I said, pulling out his chair. "You look less dusty." He smiled. "That's an improvement for both of us." We talked for 3 hours. Real conversation, not the adrenaline-fueled stuff at the evacuation site. He told me about growing up in Boston, how he'd become obsessed with earthquakes after the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake in California killed 63 people, how he'd gone to MIT for geophysics, worked for USGS, specialized in fault line prediction and seismic data analysis. "I study it because I need to understand it," he explained. "Because if I understand what's happening beneath our feet, maybe I can help predict the big ones. Maybe I can save people." "That's why you save the data," I said. "That's exactly why." He reached across the table, let his fingers brush mine. "I know it's illogical. I know the hard drive isn't more important than a human life. But it felt like if I lost that data, all those readings, it was like I was losing the only way to understand what's coming next. I get it completely." I turned my hand over, let our palms meet. I do the same thing with climbing. Stay on faces I probably shouldn't stay on. Push limits I probably shouldn't push. Because if I'm not pushing myself, if I'm not facing the absolute edge of what I can do, I don't feel alive. So we're both going to die pursuing our obsessions. "Probably," I agreed. "But at least we'll understand each other." He leaned across the table and kissed me. Gentle, deliberate. The kind of kiss that feels like finding something you didn't know you were looking for. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "I want to see you again," he said. "Without earthquakes, I want that too. And maybe you could show me the actual seismic data. I want to understand what you were saving." The next 4 weeks were structured around Samir's research schedule. I'd bring him lunch at the USGS station while he ran earthquake simulations. He'd come watch me teach climbing lessons, standing at the base with his arms crossed, watching me move across impossible rock with something like awe in his expression. "How do you not fall?" he asked once, watching me free solo a practice route. "Because falling isn't an option. Because I've trained my body to understand the rock. Because sometimes you have to trust that what you're doing makes sense. That scares me." Samir admitted. "Watching you up there, I know." I came down, pulled him close. "But I'm good at this. You have to trust me the way I trust you with earthquake predictions." He did. Slowly, carefully. He learned to let me do what I did best without trying to protect me into immobility. By week 6, Samir had moved into my rental house in Moab. We'd wake up to the canyon, spend afternoons with his work and my climbing, spend evenings on the porch watching the rocks change color as the sun moved. "I've been thinking about my career," Samir said one night, his head on my shoulder. "I could take a sabbatical, write a paper about the May earthquake, the data we preserved. Maybe work on a book about fault prediction. That sounds amazing. We could travel," he said. "I could work remotely. You could climb. We could have a life that isn't just about work." "That sounds perfect," I said, and I meant it. "But first, finish your research. I need to watch you save the world." In August, the USGS issued a warning. The May earthquake had been a foreshock. Seismic data suggested a larger event was building along the Needles Fault. Probability of a 6.8 magnitude event within 6 weeks, 62%. Samir went into overdrive. 16-hour shifts, analyzing data, running simulations, trying to narrow down not just if but when. I watched him do it, the same commitment he'd shown when saving the server. The same refusal to stop until he had answers. "You should go," I told him one morning, watching him get ready for another marathon shift. "Take people who aren't tied to you. Research without worrying about me. I'm not leaving you. You are. Not forever. But for the next month, you go, you do your work. You figure out what's coming in that fault line. I'll be here when you come back." He wanted to argue. Instead, he kissed me. "I'll be back in a month." I know. He was back in 32 days, exhausted and exhilarated. "We did it," he said, practically falling into my arms. "We mapped the fault progression. We can predict the window. It's September 15th to September 22nd. That's when it'll happen. Can you evacuate?" Already coordinating with county emergency management. "We're going to get people out. We're going to minimize casualties." He held me tighter. "I couldn't have done this without knowing I had someone to come back to. Without knowing you'd be here waiting. Always, I promised." September 15th came with clear skies and perfect climbing weather. The 6.8 magnitude earthquake hit it for 17 p.m., right in the predicted window. It lasted 14 seconds, long enough to feel the earth move in ways that shouldn't be possible. Long enough for evacuations to work. Long enough for Samir's predictions to save an estimated 83 lives. According to preliminary reports, I was at the climbing gym when it hit. Felt the ground shift, heard the alarms. Evacuated to the parking lot where emergency services were already coordinating response. My phone rang immediately. "I'm safe," Samir said before I could speak. "Everyone at the station is safe. The data systems held. We got people out." I started crying. Just sat in my truck and cried from relief, from fear, from the overwhelming gratitude that he was alive and that his work had mattered. "Come home," I said finally. "Please come home. I will. Give me 2 hours." He arrived with his team, everyone exhausted but alive. The USGS station had minimal damage. The data systems had protected everything. By the next morning, his data was being analyzed by geophysicists worldwide, and 17 news organizations wanted to interview him. He turned them all down. Later, he told his supervisor, "Right now, I need to be with my person." Epilogue. For months later, November in Moab. The canyon is turning all the colors rust red, burnt orange, deep purple shadows. Samir and I are sitting on the rocks, watching the light change. "I've been thinking," Samir said, about the fact that we met during an earthquake, about how everything was shaking when I found you, about how you've been solid ever since." I turned to look at him, and he was holding a small black box. "I know it's fast," he continued. 6 months. But I've spent my life studying what moves the earth. I know what stability looks like. I know what permanence feels like. And you're both. You're the rock face I want to climb for the rest of my life." He opened the box. The ring was simple brushed titanium, a single small diamond. "Understated and perfect. Samir Khan," I said. "I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know I want to figure it out with you. Is that a yes?" "That's absolutely a yes." He slid the ring onto my finger, and we kissed there on the rocks, with the canyon stretching out beneath us and the ground absolutely still for the first time since we'd met. "I love you," Samir said. "I love you too, even when you're being the most stubborn scientist alive. Especially then." He smiled. "That's when I'm most myself." We walked down the canyon hand in hand, engaged to be married in the place where an earthquake brought us together. And love made us both stand solid. That's not a bad love story. That's exactly the one we needed.